With the release of Season 1, a lot of quality of life was introduced. The socket changes were the best thing ever. Loot filter is absolutely useless. Invasions are bad. Farming Haley is tedious unless you use your wallet. And of course, some other good things. However, one of those good things is that Blair received a massive glow up. What's good, folks? It's Nightmare Frame here with a new First Descendant video, taking a look at the newly improved, buffed Blair. He got buffed so damn good that he feels way better to play. And what's funny is that him and Freyna both have to deal with AoE effects, but his AoE effect feels so much better than Freyna. Hopefully Freyna gets better skill modules and gets buffed when her ultimate comes out. And this Blair buff was pretty much needed since he is the next ultimate descendant after Freyna. You can always come back to this vid to see if I was right or wrong. Blair changes are quite significant and you feel them right away if you are a Blair player. I released a Blair video not too long ago and one of the builds was limited due to socket restrictions and now made easier to achieve, while other builds were made even better with the changes. So his passive now caps out at 5 stacks at base and still gives you crit chance per flame zone, capping out at those 5 flame zones for the crit chance, and enemies inflicted with burn take more crit damage, so that part is still the same. The other buff is that when he uses his extinguish, the second skill, to consume the flame zones remain on the field to keep giving you the buff. And even though you consumed the flame zones, you can still keep consuming them as long as they're still on the field. Oh yeah, it's the infinite mana loop. And now the MP recovery from using his second skill gives you a lot more mana. And the skill power modifier buff stacks up to 5 times, increased from its previous 23%, and now with a max stack of 5, you get a 30% increase from all those flame zones. His first skill now costs less mana and got a 3-second duration buff, and the burn damage over time deals more damage. His third skill does more damage, and you can cancel it whenever you want by just pressing it again. However, it still gives you screen shake at random times. Please fix that, it's annoying. And finally, the flame zones produced by his fourth skill now deal more damage and damage over time. Now that you have an idea of the changes, let's take a look at the gameplay loop and how I've built him, because I have 3 builds for you using 3 different skill modules. Alright, now that you know what has changed, let's go over his gameplay loop and what you need to do first and what you need to be aware of, because there are certain buffs that you need to pay attention to or else you're gonna mess up the rotation. And what's even funnier is that now Blair is a very huge ability spam descendant, more than any other descendant out there, because he doesn't have problems with mana, pretty much infinite mana at this point. And I found myself not even using my guns at all, but there are builds there for you if you want to use guns. All right, let's summon this group of enemies right here. First things first, you want to pay attention to your flame zones. First off, this is our first skill that produces flame zones. Our fourth skill also does flame zones, and also have a look at our passive. This shows the counter of flame zones on the field. So 1, 2, 3, normally 4, 5, 6, we're still going, 7, 8, consume all those flame zones, and you see how they're still on the field? I can go again, consume flame zones, and my mana is fully topped up, and I'm still casting abilities. Look at that. And if I want even more flame zones, well, I can cast my fourth skill. Even more flame zones and damage. Look at all those damage ticks. So all the green little icons that you're going to see on the left side of your character, those are your buffs, aka boons. So when you cast a skill or anything like that, you're going to see something appear. The one thing you want to be paying attention to is the multi-talented buff. There are 2 buffs that you're going to be seeing. Now, Blair's first, third, and fourth skill are all dimension, so it will trigger the multi-talented cooldown reduction buff, which caps out his cooldown reduction. So right now, have a look. This is a skill cooldown. It's almost max. Now, when I cast a dimension skill and I get the swiftness buff, it goes all the way to max. We maxed out our cooldown reduction. So that's pretty much what you want to see. And when you cast a singular skill, a singular is when you absorb the flame zones, and his second skill is singular. Singular increases your attribute damage. So right now, my flame zones will deal a bit more damage. And of course, because they got the attribute buff. Without the singular buff, you can see the damage difference from 142 down to 109, 113. That's the buff that you're going to be seeing. So usually when you cast flame zones on the field, right, you want to be picking up these flame zones to get that skill power modifier. However, the one way that I like to do it, and it's going to be one of the best ways, is that I need to cast my 4th skill with a dimension buff, so I get even more cooldown reduction. So boom, 4th skill is down. It's going to get a 12-second cooldown now. And you see how it's coming back up really quickly? And after those 12 seconds, I can cast it again, providing me even more flame zones. And with the singular buff, I can recast my 1 and then 3, so I can deal more damage with those. But I'll have the dimension skill buff so that I can get that cooldown reduction. And this is pretty much the gameplay loop of the mobbing build. Now, for all the ability DPS that you're going to be seeing here, I'll be using the Slayer set. Slayer set is the best set for any ability spam that doesn't need to worry about mana. You always want to have HP here and MP recovery out of combat, but with Blair, it doesn't really matter. Over here, max MP is super important. And right here, you want defense and mana recovery modifier. So if you can get yourself this combo, this is going to be the best one because MP recovery modifier affects the MP that you get from all sources. And over here, max HP, max shield, and shield recovery modifier. The reactor for the first build. Of course, you want to have a fire dimension reactor with skill crit damage. And the other substat could either be bonus range or bonus duration. I would say bonus duration is a bit better because your flame zones would last a bit longer and your buff timer lasts a bit longer. So it's about like a 2-second to 3-second increase. So that's nice to have. And the mounting weapon doesn't really matter. You can use whatever mounting weapon. Okay, on to the first build, the burn build, which is the ad clearing build. Now, for your sub modules, use whatever you want. It literally doesn't matter. It's down to you and what you have maxed out for your sub module. Let's go with long distance maneuvering. And then for the skill module here, I'm going to be using Classic Chef. Classic Chef changes the 4th and passive. Now, even though you will see the first skill gets changed, nothing really happens to it. It's just the 4th skill. It's just the 4th skill will get an increase to its flame zones, and the passive will get an increase to the flame zones as well. So have a look at these two change. Right now, 7 stacks. This is 5 stacks. For the C socket, it's pretty simple. It's going to be our only one on this build. So let's put that health mod. And we're left with 4 M's, 3 A's, and 2 R's. So let's start off with those A's really quickly. Number 1, focus on fire. This gives me fire skill power and skill cooldown reduction. And then we're going to move into skill insight and skill concentration. Our crit rate and crit damage. These are the only crit mods that I'll be using. And now I'm left with the 4 M's. 4 M's are going to be pretty simple. Since Blair does dimension damage with all his damaging skills, and that's why I'll be putting focus on dimension. This mod increases my skill power modifier. Skill power modifier, of course, allows me to do more damage, and since Blair's all about initial damage and damage over time, this is a massive boost to that damage. And then, of course, I want to improve my cooldown. So number 1, MP conversion. This reduces my mana, but it gives me that juicy minus 36.5% cooldown reduction. And then I'm going to add on to that with Nimble Fingers and Multi-Talented. So now I cap out my cooldown reduction. Now remember, when you cast a dimension skill, so that's any of his damage skills, you will trigger the cooldown reduction of Multi-Talented. This also means when you start off with a dimension skill that deals damage, it will snapshot immediately. So if I start with my 4th skill, it currently has 30 seconds. But notice, I activate my 4th skill, I also get, boom, Multi-Talented, and it comes back in 12 seconds. So as long as your skill is in the process of being cast and it has the Multi-Talented buff for the cooldown reduction, it will snapshot into that. But the reason I cast my 4th after the flame zones because I want to increase my skill power modifier. So I cast my 1, suck up the flame zones with 2, I get that buff, and then throw down my 4, then suck it up again with the 2, rinse and repeat. And of course, the last 2 R's are going to be very simple. Number 1 will be my Iron Defense. Iron Defense gives me defense and skill power modifier. And then finally, I have skill expansion to increase the range. Here's one thing that you can do. Now, if you're using a general rounds or an impact rounds weapon, you could swap Iron Defense out for more duration, and you could put Defense Master on your gun. to get the defense. Yes, you do lose the 8.1% skill power modifier, but then now you get some duration and you can just go defense master on your weapon. Unfortunately, my reactor is for a tactical rifle, and tactical rifles do not have defense master. So that is one thing that you could do. Okay, so this is the mobbing build. Now the bossing setup is very simple. The only thing that changed is the reactor, the mounting weapon, and a couple of mods. Number one, the reactor, crit damage and damage to Colossus. The goated combo. This is what allows you to deal a lot of damage with your skills. The Escava has no mods because we're not using this as a damaging tool. It's all to do with our guns. And if you want to turn one of the shoulders to yellow, I'll just use a sniper or my Nezestra. It's way better than using this doo-doo water weapon. So let's take a look at the mods. Alright, now you may have noticed similar mods to what we had on the previous build. All I did was change the skill module to Truly Deadly Cuisine. Truly Deadly Cuisine increases the damage on my fireball and also reduces its cooldown. However, now the fireball no longer produces flame zones. But look at that skill power of 6.9. Nice. 6,934% skill power. That's insanely huge.
That's what she said.
Now I have an extra A. Instead of 3 A's, I now have 4 A's. And of course, I want to multiply my damage even more when I crit. And we're always critting on this build. We have 100% crit rate on this build. I'll be placing front lines. This is skill crit damage. So now my crit damage is even higher and I'm dealing even more damage with my 4. Then lastly, I have 2 R's. Now, instead of Iron Defense, I'll be running Spear and Shield for that skill power increase. Now, you may be wondering, why don't I have Focus on Dimension here? Focus on Dimension just gives me that skill power modifier, and all that we're doing with this build is dealing initial damage and not worrying about damage over time. Now, remember, I did say our cooldown is reduced to 22 seconds. So, with Multi-Talented, this goes all the way down to 6 seconds. So, every 6 seconds, I'm throwing my 4th skill. And I can always spam it without having to worry about mana because of the 2nd skill. So the combo is simple. You want to cast your flame zones, consume them, get that 5 stacks, and then throw your 4. Boom. Big damage. Okay. And have a look at my 4th skill as back up again. And I still have the buff of my flame zones. I can throw another one. Suck up those flame zones. Recast them. Throw your 4. Suck up the flame zones to regenerate that mana. You still have the buff. Throw out your 4. Make sure you suck up those flame zones again before they go away. You get your mana back. You spam your 1. Throw out your 4. Alright, now onto the weapon platform build. Now, this is a funny build. The one thing they should know is that it's also a very squishy build. Now, you may notice something funny about the reactor, but don't worry about the reactor. Let's have a look at why we're using certain things over here. Now, the component set is the Annihilator set. Let's have a read at what it does. You get 5.7% duration at 2 pieces. And then the 4-piece. Firearm attack increases proportionally to the ratio of max HP loss, up to 26% when HP is 50% or lower. This gives us base damage when we lose our health. And Blair doesn't have to worry about mana because his 2nd skill, and this particular build is all about having a lot of duration and being a glass cannon. The other thing is that the reactor really doesn't matter. You're only here for these sub-stats. I want skill cooldown and duration. That's all I need from the reactor. And of course, this non-attribute dimension reactor has those exact stats, duration and cooldown reduction. What makes this a glass cannon build? Pay attention to my health when I cast skills. This is using backdraft, which gives me firearm attack and weak point damage. I will cast my 4th skill near me. I lose health, produce flame zones, consume my flame zones to get the buff. Now I have flame zones on the field and a buff right there. So now I deal even more damage with my guns. So you can use this combo with any weapon because all you want to have is that duration and cooldown reduction. So Enduring Legacy, Greg, Nezestra, all great weapons to deal damage to the boss. And you're dealing even more damage. So let's take a look at how this build is put together and why we're losing health and what makes us do more damage. All right, when we look at the mods, you can see a lot of things have changed. And to change between the socket types that you've already placed, of course, you want to go here and switch between them. You can see all of these are changed. We still have our 2 cooldown reduction mods because these are the only things that have not changed. So let's start off with our C slots because this is going to be really important. Our C slots, pretty simple. I'll be running increase shields. Yeah, we want shields on this build. And then HP conversion to get those shields. And then finally, Battle of Stamina. I only need Battle of Stamina for the 8.8% duration. And of course, a little bit of HP, why not? Now I filled up the 3 C sockets. However, there's going to be a 4th C right there, which doesn't need a socket type. And that's going to be conditional recharge. Let's read what it says. When using a skill, consumes 17.5% of max HP and recovers 12.2% of max shields. However, neither of these happens when your HP is like non-existent. When I use this, I trigger the Annihilation set bonus. However, it also triggers another mod, and that's Walk a Tightrope. When HP is 50% or lower, your skill power modifiers increase, but you also get a 30% boost to your firearm attack. Now I have 3 R slots left, and one of them is going to be increase in defense, because we're only shields and we want our shields to survive a bit longer. And then skill extension for the duration, maximizing that duration even more with maximize duration. So you see duration, 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 and of course the 4-piece annihilator for duration, and alongside the reactor for even more duration. So now if we save, so now with all these mods here, we're going to be using Backdraft. When you use your second skill, increases your weak point damage and firearm attack. So that's pretty huge. So when we save, you'll see everything has changed. The passive, now you get firearm critical hit rate increase with every flame zones on the field. Having those flame zones with the increased duration gives you crits. And of course, when you consume flame zones, you get firearm attack and weak point damage. Our modded base damage is at 32.k and our weak point damage is at 3.7. Our crit chance is at 29.8. So we cast our 4th skill, produce flame zones. 1, 2, that's 5 flame zones now. Suck them up. Let's have a look at our stats. 67% crit rate, 43% base damage, and we got an increase to our weak point damage. You see? That's what happens. So our crits are better, and we're doing more damage. Taking a look at the Enduring Legacy build real quick. I do have our base damage and even more base damage with mental focus. Now, for those wondering about sharp precision shots, I did try it and it's not that great with this Blair setup. You blow your load way too quickly and, well, the enemy's still alive. Even if you have an end zone on your team, you're still not going to have enough ammo to sustain this damage. That's why mental focus was so much better, and it had way better sustain, and my damage was way better. Crit rate, crit damage, the fire element, fire rate, and the magazine capacity. And for the substats, you want crit rate, crit damage, rounds per magazine, and bonus Colossus. And for the Greg, you want firearm attack, weak point damage, and crit rate. However, you could switch some of the things around, as in dropping crit rate for Colossus damage or dropping firearm attack for Colossus damage, since we get a lot of base damage. For the Greg build, very straightforward, similar setup. I do have base damage, and over here, fire conductor. So when I proc fire from the bombardment, I get an increase to my base damage. Heavy aiming, weak point sight for the weak point damage, better insight for the crit rate, and crit damage over here, magazine capacity, and finally some fire rate. Anyway, folks, that has been it from the new and updated Blair builds. Try him out, he's so much better than before, and is actually one of my favorite descendants now after the changes. He feels so good to use. I love spamming abilities, I love having infinite mana, and of course trying funny setups with bossing and nuking. So yeah, that has been it for me. I do hope you enjoyed this video and learned something from it, and if you did, please feel free to leave a like, share, and subscribe for more first descendant content streams and so much more. Do refer to the description. Thanks for watching, and as always, peace. Bye-bye now.